For more resources, visit rymonline.org.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Local Youth Worker, a daily podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. This week's guest is Collin Hansen. Collin, welcome.
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Collin serves as editorial director for the Gospel Coalition. He's the author and editor of several books. 2 books he authored are Blind Spots, Becoming a Courageous, Compassionate, and Commissioned Church, and Young, Restless, Reformed, A Journalist's Journey with the New Calvinist. Prior to working for TGC, he worked as an associate editor for Christianity Today magazine. Collin, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your family and where you grew up and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in South Dakota, grew up in the United Methodist Church, grew up next to my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, cousins, all that sort of stuff. My dad still farms. My mom's a preschool special ed teacher. I'm a long way away from them, though, now. I live in Birmingham, Alabama with my wife, Lauren, and my almost 3-year-old son, Carter, and a little baby girl on the way around Christmas time. So, in the middle there, spent a lot of those years in Chicago for my schooling and for my work, and a little bit of time outside of New York City and New Jersey there as well. But happy to be making my way here in the Deep South, in the heart of Dixie.
Good deal. So all this week we're breaking away from our regular format, and we'll be addressing questions centered on Collin's book, Young, Restless, Reformed. For those who are familiar with the Student Discipleship Guide that RYM produced with Josh Byers, Collin's book is featured on that list as a book students should read. And as we get into the questions focused on this book, I also want our listeners to know that Collin has a lot on his plate right now. The Gospel Coalition is launching a new website, and he's graciously agreed to appear on this podcast. However, these interviews will be a bit shorter than our usual format in order to help Collin out a bit. So again, we appreciate you making time. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and get on with our first question. You ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So, Collin, what were your passions for writing Young, Restless, Reformed? And for those who have not read the book, maybe just briefly explain your adventure in putting that together.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of my background coming from the United Methodist Church. That wasn't really how I became a Christian, though. I became a Christian through a revival ministry for youth. I was 15 years old. I was held at a local Lutheran church. A lot of my categories of mainline or evangelical were kind of confused back then. Basically, I just knew that I wanted to be involved in a church where people really were excited and eager to follow the Lord, and and had this born again conversion experience. But by the time I got to college, I started to put some theological categories together. I was discipled in a ministry that was really strong with the church, really strong with evangelism, and also really strong with theological study. And so part of that theological study was learning a lot about Reformed theology and learning about it as this historical, biblical theology within this missional context with a heavy emphasis on the local church as well. But by the time I got to Christianity Today magazine, I realized that my experience was not everybody else's experience. Just one of those things you learn as you get older. And a lot of my friends there had gone to Christian colleges, and many of them actually had become, to some degree, disenchanted with at least the faith that they had grown up with. And they were exploring different alternatives. And back during this time, we're kind of coming off the years where the church growth movement was really the biggest, or kind of almost in some ways the only show in town compared to the traditional denominational churches. But we were transitioning into a reaction against that. And one of the reactions was toward a new kind of an idea that, especially for youth, this was a huge emphasis on youth ministry back then. And I think it is still to some degree today. But essentially, people were saying in postmodernity, these truth claims of Christianity, these propositional beliefs that Jesus died for sinners and he died on the cross, these don't work anymore. We need a new postmodern approach to the faith. And that meant throwing out a lot of historical Christianity. That was very confusing to me. I couldn't find any rationale for that on biblical grounds or in my experience. So I went on a search to find out if anybody else had had that kind of experience that I'd had, where they learned a lot about Reformed theology and found in that a way to understand the Bible, a way to build churches, a way to be able to evangelize in the power of God. And so I traveled around the country from Seattle to New Haven to my home base there in Chicago, down to Atlanta, and all kinds of different places in between, Washington, D.C., just talking to people, asking questions, young people who people never heard of before, famous people, Minneapolis, John Piper, spending time in his house, getting to know him personally, getting to know his family and things like that. And I just wanted to be able to understand what's happening here in the younger generation in America today. And I found out that my experience actually was happening with a lot of different people, even people from Methodist backgrounds, people from Baptist backgrounds, not just the same Presbyterians who really had been a part of that Reformed world all along. And so I just started to put those stories down on paper, and it was just a really exciting thing. I did indeed discover that this was a common, not the most popular thing that was happening in our day, but a common story and indeed a work of God in our era.
How much time did that take? Was that a 2-year period? Is that what you said in the book?
Yeah, so I started, about 2 years. So I started that project in, I think, the spring of early 2006, like right off the bat. And then I went to the inaugural Together for the Gospel conference, which would have been in April of 2006, published the feature article, cover story for Christianity Today in September, I think, of 2006. Then the book came out in April of 2008. So basically, all of 2006 and 2007, as my wife can attest, were basically devoted to my travels and to writing this book. It was a pretty labor-intensive project, but a labor of love as well.
Absolutely. And like I said, that's on our list for a reason. I think it's a helpful book for kind of students in the upper high school ages, as well as those who are headed off to college, just as they're most likely wrestling with a lot of the themes that you deal with there, and gives a lot of helpful background and history to the Reformed tradition. So thanks so much for that, Collin.